Welcome to another edition of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. And today, I don't know, let's talk about the offensive line. Seems to be a very strong point of conversation this offseason for the Seattle Seahawks and their fans. And certainly it was a focus of mine down at the Senior Bowl last week and of Parker Blake's. Parker is a content creator, covers the Cincinnati Bengals, but also coaches offensive line and is a recruiting coordinator at the high school level. And so I'm going to bring both of his scouting eye and his content creator eye, his coaching eye as well, get his thoughts on what he saw in Mobile, some of the guys in that group that might be perfect fits for the Seahawks, especially given Clint Kubiak's inclusion in the offensive staff and the scheme he likes to run, and even going to ask Parker about some of the guys he saw at the Senior Bowl last year, because there are some other young offensive linemen on the Seahawks roster that he doesn't think you should give up on quite yet. Let's get into it. This is Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Just bang on that like button as many times as you want to. Subscribe to the channel. And if you hit that little bell, it'll give you notifications whenever there's a live stream or new content, of which a couple of weeks from now, there will be much more as I spend the next couple of months doing this full time as of about the 20th of this month when the relocation is finished and I'm all settled in. So until then, any other way that you want to support the show, those are all listed and linked down in the description as well. Running out of time to get in on the money lines and all the prop bets for the big game this Sunday in New Orleans. And if you get over to BetUS right now, sign up for a new account, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to a total of $2,000 if you use the promo code YouTube150. Funny enough, when I went to Mobile, I thought taking a break from my usual life, my career, which is very physically demanding, I would come back so fresh and refreshed, 70-degree sunshine, and just 9 days of not having to do what I do for a living primarily. And I came back and I'm more broken than ever. Now my knee is acting up in a way that it never has before. And so, yeah, that's fun. Anyway, let's talk offensive line today, shall we? It is certainly, if it's not the most prevalent storyline of this offseason for the Seahawks and their fans, it's 1B, along with who you want to play quarterback and whether or not and in what timeline they settle things with Geno Smith. So I thought it was a great time to bring Parker on the show. Got to meet him down in Mobile and kind of pick his brain a little bit about what he does. And if you've watched this show for any length of time, or if you haven't, this may be news to you, but this is how this works. I love talking to really smart people. And if there's something that I'm not an expert in, which I'm not an expert in much, I like to bring them on the show and let them give their perspective to you. So who better to talk offensive line than a guy that coaches it and scouts it and loves it. And you're going to love what Parker has to say about a bunch of this. So here we go. All right, Parker, thanks for coming on. I trust that you are well adjusted to being back home now after a week in Mobile. It was your second straight year attending that event and watching the practices and the games. How'd you feel? How was the week for you? How was the event?
It's always a good time going down there, whether it's meeting up with people and just having good conversation, getting to interact with the players and watch the practices. I love going to the game and going up into the press box. I think the whole week's just a fun event, and I just love going. It's like a mini vacation for me, even though kind of like you and I were talking about pre-show, just as far as working while you're down there, getting content out, writing articles, creating videos, just all of that stuff with it. I mean, it's still a fun time for me. I love it.
Yeah. And it still feels like tip of the iceberg, like all the stuff that I've done since I've come home. And I'm like, I haven't even done half of the stuff that I thought I would. Let me ask you this. I know we're going to focus mostly on the offensive line because that's your specialty. But as far as the group as a whole, there was a lot of buzz before the event. And then Jim Nagy said it himself on Monday. He thought it was the best overall group of talent the game's ever had. Would you agree with that from what you've seen, even before you went in person last year, just watching it on TV?
I mean, I thought last year's group was better than this year's group overall. I think there were some better players and spots, but I think overall, when you're looking at like the class, I think last year's was better than this year's personally.
Interesting. And as far as the offensive line goes, how'd you feel about the group as a whole? And then just, regardless of fit or anything else, because I'm gonna get your insight on what you think might work for the Seahawks here out of this collection of talent. But just overall, a couple guys that really stood out to you, like from day one, and then continued all the way through and had a good week.
No, for sure. I mean, this offensive line group was interesting coming in. I said for a while, like leading up to the Senior Bowl, that I was very interested to see how it was going to go. I thought there was a pretty big disparity between the defensive line talent that went down and the offensive line talent that went down. And so I said it was a great week to make money as an offensive lineman at the Senior Bowl, and a kind of a tougher week to stand out as a defensive lineman. And I thought a lot of the offensive linemen really stepped it up. I thought it was going to be kind of a bloodbath all week. I thought practices were going to be pretty underwhelming, but ended up having some really good competition, especially in the one-on-ones. I think guys that stood out to me specifically outside, I think it was more outside of the guys that I already knew of. Like I always go down with questions and I watch prospects. I'm looking to confirm things or answer questions. But the guys that really stood out to me, the two that I mentioned all week were Jackson Slater and Caleb Rogers. And neither of them were on my board going down. Jackson Slater out of Sacramento State, and then Caleb Rogers out of Texas Tech. Weren't really, on my radar. I hadn't really got a bunch of film. I watched a little bit of Rogers, but none of Slater. And by the end of the week, I had fallen in love with both of them. I think they're very versatile interior offensive linemen. I think the league has a need for offensive linemen, especially interior offensive linemen. And I think they're both like these day three guys that I think could be looked at as gems down the road. So those are probably my two favorite guys coming out of the week. And then obviously you have your bigger names like the Gray Zables that everyone talked about, and the Wyatt Milliam, he was just trying to find a spot to fit in. But I think those two guys really stood out to me.
We'll get to some specific guys. I think you touched on something interesting, though. The individual portion of D-line against offensive line, you have to chalk it up for the most part as a win for the offense throughout the week. I
think so, yeah.
And then even that American team, which just was loaded with, they kind of had more of the small school guys, right? You had Jacob Bayer and Slater, as you mentioned, and even Carson Vincent from Alabama A&M, who had great weeks in the individual stuff. And then we got to game day, and the national team ends up, I think, with 8 sacks at the end.
Yeah, something crazy.
Really, really. Was that just, what would you attribute that to? Was it just kind of, was it the small school thing coming up, or did you see some continuity issues there? Because there were some players that pulled out before the game started.
Well, I think something that, like, as far as O-line play is concerned, that people just don't think about, especially in an all-star situation, is just the chemistry between those guys. And then all the different play styles that you're bringing in. Like, all these guys played in such various like schemes throughout their college careers. Yeah. They were used to working with certain guys next to them. So then you get in an all-star game, and you're working through drills with these guys, you're working through team periods, and even like the one-on-one stuff. Like, you're working through all of that. But at the end of the day, you haven't really played in a live game situation with these guys. You don't know how they're going to interpret calls. You don't know how they're going to react to certain stunts and blitzes. And at the end of the day, I think that just showed up. I mean, it was a lot of misprotections. It looked like miscommunications to me as far as guards sliding in or out and tackles not being aware of where their help was. And they thought they were handing off to somebody who wasn't there. Like, it was just, but then I thought, Carson Vincent had a really bad day. And I think that was the FCS standout for me in the game that really hurt the team towards the end of the, game. So
yeah, he really struggled again after having a great week in the individual stuff. I'm going to come back to the continuity thing. I'm glad you touched on that when we talk about the Seahawks specifically. We'll get back to that. Let me ask you to expand on one in particular there, because the first name that you mentioned right off the top, Jackson Slater, is a guy from here, went to Newport High School in Bellevue. He's a local kid here, goes to Sacramento State, and he reported, in fact, I'm having him on the show tomorrow.
There you go.
The Seahawks are the only team that's asked for a second meeting with him so far. Tell me more about Slater and why, if that were to be one of the picks, Seahawk fans should be excited.
Yeah, Slater's, I think, I watch a lot of just offensive line film in general, but it's always funny being an offensive line coach. Like, I have the stuff that I like to coach, the stuff that I focus on with my guys, and I feel like every offensive line coach has their own style that they coach with. Like, you have the zone guys that are more, hey, win the leverage battle, be athletic. You have the gap guys that are, be downhill, be physical. You have pass pro specialists who are all about, patience and gaining that depth. And for me, what I really, emphasize with my guys and focus on when I'm evaluating as far as finding guys that I personally like a lot, it's physicality at the point of attack. And it's all about, motor. I always call it the motor or finish, whatever you want to call it. And Jackson Slater embodied both of those traits so well. Like even watching his one-on-ones, a lot of guys will settle back and they'll kind of react to the defensive lineman. But Jackson Slater's firing off the ball, engaging early, trying to get hands on early. Because I've always said, if you're trying to run stunts, you're trying to run these weird exotic blitzes and trying to confuse offensive linemen, the best way to stop that is to attack, get hands on early, and then you can just stop your defensive linemen in place. They don't have the opportunity to really go anywhere without you taking them there or at least giving away where they're going. And I think that's what I loved most about his game on day one was just that one-on-one period where it felt like he was shutting everybody down at the line of scrimmage and redirecting really well. But then I kind of started getting into some of the film at night throughout the week, and watching his work during the run pods was super fun because I think he's built and plays like a zone guy. Like he's very athletic. I think he knows how to win the leverage battle. I don't think he has the longest arms. I can't remember the length off the top of my head, but they didn't really show up, especially again in the run pods where it's kind of 2v1 or 2v2 situations, or 3v2, I should say. He was able to get into double teams, really dig guys out that might anchor in and just run his feet through blocks and still displace guys, even some of these bigger name guys, even when he was paired up with another FCS guy. Like he was always dominating in those run pods. And again, just I think every time I look down at the field, I tell people there's kind of three groups that you can put guys in. You look down at the field, they're kind of just doing whatever. You look down at the field, they're always dominating. You look down at the field, they're always, on their face, they're always losing. And Jackson Slater, I felt like every time I found him, he was winning a rep. He was in a really good battle. Like he was just battling nonstop throughout practices. And I think that showed up in the games as well, where he's, again, engaging early, displacing guys, creating lanes, whether it's throwing lanes or running lanes. A high motor guy. I just loved everything about his game. I know he's a day 3 guy, but he's a guy that I'd love on my team on day 3.
33-inch arms officially is what he measured.
Oh, there you go. Throw him a tackle.
That's now, on that note, he's played mostly guard. He got some center reps in Mobile, but it seemed like there were some other guys that they needed to get those reps for. And so he stayed mostly guard, but I've seen a lot of scouts tend to agree that center might be his best spot. Where would you play him?
Yeah, I think it was funny enough. I guard's easier from a technical perspective than center, obviously. But I think there was him and Zabel were the two guys that they bumped into center, and I was like, I think he looks better as a center than a guard. And I love Slater as a guard, but then bumping him into center and even interviewing him at media day and after practices and whatnot, like talking to him, he's very, very, very high football IQ. He's looking forward to directing traffic up front. I think he's ready for that position. Like I really do feel like he's a guy that could come into a camp and really work his way up a depth chart quickly, just because he's very cerebral and he has the talent to go along with it. So I'm all for him at any of the 3 interior spots. I think he can flex both sides as a guard, and I think he can fit in great as a center. And having that kind of length as a center is actually really advantageous when you're able to work leverage like he is. And that's why he's able to, I always call it forklift, but get arms underneath and really dig some of those lower defenders out of the way and get them, displaced. And so I love that fit personally. Now,
of course, when we're talking about the Seattle Seahawks and the offensive line, it's been an issue for a couple of years now. It just the unrest from the fan base seems to have kind of reached a crescendo this offseason to where they want to basically just throw the whole group out and start over again. And that's obviously not realistic. So I want to go back to that concept earlier that you touched on about continuity. And I've been preaching this for months, that's not the answer. The Seahawks have invested a ton of resources in the draft the last couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
In young offensive linemen. And you're not just going to give up on all those guys. Now, you were at the Senior Bowl last year. You got to see Christian Haynes up close.
Yes,
you got to see Sataoa Lamea. Haynes was a standout during Senior Bowl week last year. Didn't gain any traction, was never able to win the job in Seattle, even though there were some injury issues. Even when Anthony Bradford went down, Lamea lapped him. What did you see from Haynes last year at the Senior Bowl? How do you feel about him as a prospect? Were you surprised he wasn't able to win a spot this year?
Yeah, no, I loved what Haynes did at the Senior Bowl last year. I was a huge fan of his game. I talked to him a couple times down there, and he was kind of like how I am with Slater this year, where I came out of the week and I was like, Haynes might be one of my favorite linemen in this draft just because of his versatility. I know there was a lot of talk about him being under. Sheesh, what happened? Sorry. Start over.
Pets are always welcome on this show.
Sheesh. He's like eating my arm, dude. This is like ridiculous. He stepped on himself apparently. Anyway, I'll start over. Christian Haynes last year, Senior Bowl. Loved Christian Haynes last year at the Senior Bowl. One of my favorite prospects that I watched the whole week. I came out of the week and I was really considering him being one of my, not like top rated, but one of my personal favorite offensive linemen in the class, because again, I loved his style of play, his athleticism. There was a lot of conversation with him being undersized. And I mean, yeah, you stood next to him and you're like, oh, he could probably be a little bit bigger, probably like, thinking of an NFL guard for him to be a little bit bigger. But then you see him on the field, especially working next to Guyton. And I talked about that relationship a lot last year. They were training together throughout the offseason. And so when they were able to get together, whether it was during individual time or again in the run pods, they were just decimating defensive linemen. But then watching Haynes, again, work that guard center flexibility at the Senior Bowl, I saw him the same way. Like I was just talking about Slater. I loved his flexibility. I loved the ceiling. I thought he had a very high floor for being an undersized, quote unquote, small school prospect coming out of UConn. Like, I'm a huge fan of his game. And when he went to Seattle, I was like, that's a great fit for him. I'm a big fan of Charles Cross. I liked Abe Lucas. Let's throw him in there. Let's get him going on this offensive line. And then as the season went, I was like, oh, like I expected to see him a lot more. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's one of those situations where they're letting, some guy get the start. And then by week 6, 7, 8, he'll work his way in there and he'll finish out the season. And then the season just kept going. And like, he was getting spots. He would get run every now and then. But like, I never saw anything on film that told me he was a bad player or like it wasn't translating. Like, I thought he looked good when he was in there. I didn't think he ever really got, abused per se on any one rep. And so I never really understood why when they had the struggles that they had, it felt like this year, from being an outside perspective Seahawks fan, but I always have a spot for the Seahawks in my heart. But I was watching the season, I was just wondering why they didn't just give him a game or two. And especially being another Senior Bowl guy, kind of a good example, Bo Limmer last year out of Arkansas, the center going to LA. I mean, I didn't expect him to even really get run this year, right? But with all their O-line turnover and just issues in general, he started getting a couple starts here and there towards the end of the year. And he ended up finishing out the year as the number one guy. And I think he's got a strong case to have that same spot coming into next season. And I kind of had that trajectory planned out for a guy like Haynes, and it just never materialized. And so again, I'm not following the Seahawks too closely. I don't know what I can point to, but I'm very surprised that he's not getting more run.
It was a little mysterious, especially after, as you mentioned, he got some opportunities. They kind of rotated he and Bradford early. And then in the Detroit game, Bradford got dinged up and he had to play the whole second half. And by all accounts, we all thought he held up well.
Yeah.
There's some whispers about maybe just practice habits aren't as tight as they need to be. But even Mike McDonald himself name dropped him in his post-season press conference, like unprompted, as a guy that they still believe in. I mean, offensive linemen, maybe you can make the argument as much as any other position because of the differences in how offenses are executed in college versus the pros, especially those spread systems we're seeing being so prevalent now. Like their development curve is wider sometimes, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I've talked about, because in Cincinnati with Cordell Volson, who's been quite the hot topic for the last 3 seasons, really. But I've always projected kind of the growth track, the standard growth track of an offensive lineman from rookie to when can you actually truly evaluate who this guy is outside of, being a clear bust or whatnot. But it's like 3 years, right? Because your first year in the league, you're getting a lot of technique work. Like your offensive line coach, your offseason trainers, it's all correcting your technique, trying to break the bad habits and just get ready for NFL football, and then get hopefully some experience, if not a good amount of experience in that rookie year, so you can at least see the speed of the game and apply that technique. And then year 2, I've always said, is the slowdown year. That's when your processing is going to increase, because you're going to start being used to seeing the speed. You're going to get used to seeing the different looks from a defensive perspective as an offensive lineman. You're going to get used to seeing all these things. It's going to become more commonplace, and that's where it's going to help you process things a lot faster because the game slows down for you. And so then in year 3, that's when you can really say, okay, this guy's had the technique work. He's got time in the league. He's got time on task. What is this guy going to do for us? And then you can evaluate that 4th season as far as being, the contract year for a lot of guys that get drafted, get the 4-year contract. So I've always said it's that 3-year track. And then again, a high floor player is going to be on a shorter track. A high ceiling player, if they pick things up quickly, could be accelerated. But, for the standard offensive lineman, whether it's a PFA or a drafted guy, I try to give him a 3-year window to at least give him a chance, right? Because how much time are they really getting as a rookie? How much time are they really getting in year 2? But by that 3rd season, you should have the time on task, even if it's just through practice reps, to really get out there and put something on tape that people can evaluate. And
then to your continuity point, once Abe Lucas came back and that group was able to get 7 or 8 games together under their belt until Lucas had to miss week 18, they got better. magically, right? And part of that solution was Satawa Lamea playing at right guard next to Olu Oluwatimi between he and Lucas, even though he did lap Christian Haynes. Lamea was in Mobile last year. Did he stand out to you at all? Do you recall how you felt about his performance?
Being based out of Utah, I always got to check out the Utah guys, whether it's on tape or live. And I was really just underwhelmed with his foot speed. I thought Lamea looked really small in Mobile, like comparatively to the guys that he was next to. And then again, I mean, you had guys like Patrick Paul and Tyler Guyton down there. So I mean, your scale's a little skewed, but just sitting out there with the group, I thought he looked a little undersized. I thought the feet were slow. I thought he had great power through his upper body. I thought he could move guys in the run game if he wanted to, but it just kind of seemed low energy, low athleticism. But then, seeing him play for the Seahawks, I'm like, well, this is not the guy that I saw in Mobile last year.
They're running trap with him.
Yeah. He looks extremely mobile, looks extremely mobile.
You're still in that mode.
But yeah, no, I was very, very impressed by him. But I don't know, again, I don't know if he put a better stuff on tape than Haynes did. I just wonder if he picked up the scheme faster, or like you said, if it's some weird, practice issue that's just intermittent, that they just rather would have the guy that they can, quote unquote, trust more in whatever sense of the word that might be. Like, I don't know how that dynamic works, but then even I was pretty low on a guy on Oluwatimi, who, I mean, he won a lot of awards at Michigan, did a lot of great things at Michigan. But I just didn't love the film. Again, another foot speed guy where I liked what he could do in pass protection. I thought he did a great job of filling space, handing stunts off well, picking up blitzes. But I just worried about him in the run game. And then, you put him in Seattle, and all of a sudden he's this great mover, great at the second level, attracts linebackers well. And so I don't know if you guys just got something cooking up there with that offense, but you guys are able to crank, it feels like you're able to kind of turn around some of these offensive linemen. And that's where it kind of worries me from my evaluation perspective, because I feel like I'm backwards on everybody that just ends up in Seattle. But I don't know. I'm very interested to see how it kind of goes.
It's the biggest face-off of the year coming up on Sunday. Super Bowl and Super Balls. Don't let your grooming game get flagged for unnecessary roughness. Introducing the Beard and Balls bundle from Manscaped, your ultimate grooming MVP. This kit keeps you sharp from face to below the waist. Don't fumble your grooming game. Step up and score big where it matters most, and join the movement trusted by over 12 million men worldwide. What you get in this package: 2 MVP tools, the Beard Hedger for perfecting your playoff beard, and the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra to ensure your below-the-waist grooming game is as sharp as your game-winning pass. Your face and balls will thank you. Whether you're cleaning up for the big game or prepping for your own Super Bowl party, the Beard and Balls bundle tackles all zones with ease. Be the MVP of your grooming routine with the Beard and Balls bundle from Manscaped. Head to manscaped.com and use code Seahawks for 20% off plus free shipping. Don't fumble this opportunity. Your face and balls will thank you. That's manscaped.com in promo code Seahawks. And you'll get 20% off plus free shipping on your first order. And as always, head over to shopdoer.com and check out what I think is the best apparel company out there. And I'm in particular a huge fan of these stretch performance jeans. A lot of the famous stretch brands have 5% stretch in them. These have 20. They feel like joggers. They're that comfortable, but they're built tough. You wouldn't know that these aren't jeans. You pull them out of the package and you know that they're built for doing. That's what Doer stands for. So head on over to shopdoer.com. That's shopdoer.com/forever. And you'll get 20% off your first order of the best apparel company I have found. Well, and now you talk about, scheme and progress with some of those young offensive linemen. Now they change out the entire offensive coaching staff.
Yep.
and so let's talk about scheme. Clint Kubiak is very much like his dad, right? He learned that scheme from his dad, who learned it from Mike Shanahan. It's, some of this younger generation might think Kyle Shanahan invented that scheme if they haven't been around that long, but we remember it otherwise. Certainly I do. With that being said, he, while he says, I'm going to adapt to what we can do well and what we have on hand, and to some extent to the personnel, his preference is very, very wide zone scheme based in the run game. And so is John Benton, who he brought with him as his offensive line coach, longtime offensive line coach in the NFL. So that being said, what let's go back to that group at the Senior Bowl. If Seahawk fans are combing that roster, trying to find like the next guy that can try to help get this offensive line to where it needs to be to get this team over the hump, who specifically were some guys down there in Mobile that you would see as really good fits on the interior in particular? That's where the biggest need is in that wide zone scheme.
Yeah, no, I think that's where a guy like a later round guy in Caleb Rogers, I think can really slide into that very well with that. Again, the high football IQ. I think he can push for an IOL 4 or 5 job at the worst. But I think as you transition to a more wide zone heavy scheme, I wonder if some of the athleticism issues that I projected do start popping up, and you got guys like, Haynes sliding in, or a guy like Rogers sliding in, or even a guy like a Gray Zabel pushing for that center spot. But that's where, personally, I think, I look at more of the tackles when I'm thinking kind of Seahawks needs and what they, especially when you're switching to the zone system, where a guy like Abe Lucas, who I was a fan of, but I was more of a fan of him as kind of a more stout pass protector, not a crazy athletic run blocker.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'd look at some of these tackles and see what you can think about them. And that's where a guy like Jalen Rivers out of Miami might be the perfect fit for Seattle, just because I think he does have true 5-position flexibility, though he might look a little stubby out there at tackle. He has the length that can hang, and I think he's got great footwork, great foot speed. I think he can do both for Seattle as far as, working in pass protection and the run game, but also really marrying that play action stuff that guys like to do out of the wide zone looks, where he's going to be athletic enough to really work on those ends on the play side or the back side of those schemes. And I think he would just kind of be a great, hey, we know we need to keep bringing in offensive line talent, but don't necessarily know which position to attack. Let's bring in a guy that can be flexible, whether we need a center in a pinch, or we looking to replace a tackle, or his tackle goes down. Like, this guy can kind of just be a true like offensive line 6 type guy if he's able to catch up in time.
It seemed like there were a lot of those guys down there too that had that flexibility.
Yeah.
Joseph Savanaya played more guard as the week went along. Wyatt Millen's a guy that's fascinating to me. Early in the offseason, early in the draft process, there were some mock drafts who had him kind of rising up, getting into the first round a little bit, and then that prompted me to look at him. Played mostly tackle at West Virginia. There's some things about his footwork that drive me crazy on the outside, but as the week went on in Mobile, he played more and more guard, and I think he only played guard in the game, if I'm not mistaken. Did you think he was more comfortable there?
Yeah, no, I think he's a guard, and that's where early, day one, especially pre-practice, he was working out with the centers. They tried to give him some run at center, and that experiment just did not go well. It didn't seem like he was able to pick up kind of the nuance with that position. But every time he got slated in at guard, I think day over day, rep over rep, drill over drill, he was improving. And I think really you could get him through a camp, and I'd be interested to see what he looks like week 1 at the guard spot, because I do think he's a great guy that is more of a guard tackle flex guy. There's all the different flex positions if you want to get into it, but
right.
I think he's a guard tackle flex guy, and I think he can do both very, very well, if not adequately enough at the NFL level. I don't know if he's going to be this all pro, put him wherever you want to put him, like they've been doing in Kansas City with Tooney.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he's that guy, but I do think he's got a good future at guard. And I do think, if he's not able to crack a starting 5, throwing him as your 6th man, kind of like I talked about with Rivers, where it's like, hey, at least we know we have a guy that we can trust at kind of both of these spots, if not all 4 spots by the end of camp. So I'm a fan of his game. I worry about his range as a tackle, like a true tackle. And like I said, I don't think the experiment will at center. So I do see him as a true guard personally, but I think you could flex him out to tackle, and he'd be able to hang out there for a minute for you.
I'm gonna ask you to tap in a little bit to your scouting eye and your coaching acumen all at the same time. With a guy like Millen, who he has a really bad habit when he's playing tackle of backpedaling into his pass sets instead of sliding. Right? It just and here in Seattle, that brings back Jermaine Ifedi, PTSD, bad memories over and over again. When you see something like that a guy that's playing at a high level at a big program in college, and he has a habit like that, as a coach, do you think I can fix that? Or as a scout, do you think if he hasn't fixed it by now, that might be a blind spot, and that's a red flag for me?
Well, and that's always where it's you want to get more familiar with what they're doing, where he's been developing the last 3, 4, 5 years. And that's, at West Virginia, you want to start looking at some of those other tackles that are down there. Are they having the same issues? And that's where I think his issue is a lot of guys, they don't want to, they try not to coach the sliding or dragging the inside leg in your set as a tackle. They want you to kind of keep both feet active so you can be able to be a little more athletic in your set, move with those DNs a little bit better. But what you'll run into is guys that are a little bit more hesitant, whether that's, an intentional patience because you're trying to sort what's in front of you, or if that's, just getting back there and you're not processing well and you don't know what's coming at you. You're just kind of running away from it, trying to see it. That's where you kind of have to have conversations with the individual and say, hey, why are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this back pedal instead of a slide, instead of a kick out? Or like, why are you operating in this way? And with him, what I saw on the film, I think he's a very cerebral player, but I think that can kind of be a hindrance to his game where I think he kind of overthinks things and overcomplicates things at a mental level. And that's where, as a coach, you can fix that in offseason. I can get you to process better in an offseason if that's really what the issue is. Now, if it's a true technique thing and he just doesn't feel comfortable kicking, that's where I'm like, okay, I'll throw you at guard. And if you're at guard, that's not going to be an issue because we're going to move more laterally anyway. And so we'll eliminate that problem with the position change. And that's where I think, it's, if you watch the film, it's irritating. Like I agree, I'm 100% on your side. Like watching it, it's like, please stop doing that. But if you look at kind of where he's projecting, you can get past that a little bit and just say, oh, well, it's because he's a guard. He doesn't need tackle footwork. He's a guard. And I think he's a fine fit there. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to throw him at tackle and he gets faced with some like legitimate power at the NFL level, then he's going to run into some issues early on in his career because he just doesn't have the wide base or good footwork to anchor well against those kind of moves. Yeah. And I think he plays a little bit tall. And so that's, again, I worry about the tackle projection, but I just try not to think about it because I kind of like him as a guard. So we'll call him a guard, and I like what he can do there.
Ask you about another guy that has some local ties, went to Rainier Beach High School here in Seattle, and then stayed in the Pacific Northwest at Oregon his entire career. Josh Carnley Jr. came into the week with kind of a rising with a bullet, had some first-round buzz working for him, and then had the worst rep of anyone in Mobile. And some of that is just really bad timing and bad luck. I feel bad for him, but it was a great moment for Mike Green. But by all accounts, seemed to have a little bit of an up and down week. What'd you see from Josh?
I didn't see. He was a guy I came in with quite a few questions that I was like, either hoping to confirm or be able to deny by the end of the week as far as just kind of how his game went, how he looked. I was really excited to see him at guard as well. Kind of like you hinted at earlier, but this entire class, it feels like, has multi-positional flex outside of a couple guys, and it's outside of these tackles that are like, 6'8", 6'9". I don't see those guys bumping in. But Connerly, I thought both of the Oregon tackles were very inconsistent throughout their last couple seasons. Like I think they both play a little tall. I think they both are inconsistent with how they want to attack certain rushers. They don't really ever seem to have a plan they feel confident in. It feels like they're very reactive, and that's, again, not a bad thing if you have the athleticism to tie with it that you can react with. Where I don't think Connerly does, and that's where, again, I was super excited to see him play guard this week, and I thought he did very well on the interior. I thought he uses his length well. I thought he was able to mirror very well. Again, I thought he was strong in his anchor and his punch. But then you put him at tackle, and that pad level starts coming back up a little bit. You see him kind of get rolled through by Mike Green because his pad level was a little tall. Yeah, and he starts leaning on blocks again, and it's just like, I don't know why you approach things so differently as a guard, but you just seem more comfortable there. Like just watching the film, you seem to be a better fit on the inside, where I think he could work at tackle. He has the frame, he has the experience, just kind of some technical flaws. But if those are just pieces of his game that you can't really work out of him throughout, OTAs and camp, then you kind of have to just be like, okay, well, I guess he's just a guard for us. And so I don't put him in like the Wyatt Millen bucket as like, oh, it was a disaster at tackle, don't put him at tackle. But I do think he's more of a project at tackle, where I think he could be more of a, maybe not a day one guard, but he could definitely be competing for a spot day one. And maybe, if you have a tackle need in the future, again, you have a questionable spot at tackle right now you're trying to solve. You bring in Connerly, you can almost, what you have as a guard for the most part. You kind of know what you're going to get out of him. I don't see his ceiling increasing him raising to that ceiling too much in year one. But you can kind of work on him as a tackle in the offseason. You can, get him in as a guard, get through year one, and then in that second offseason you're working as a flex guy. You're going to start rotating him in at tackle, and you're in some of those jumbo sets where he can be the sixth man, and you kind of start working him in that way. And I think he can really become a solid tackle for you. I just don't think it's going to be year one or potentially year two.
I want to ask you about one more guy from the Senior Bowl, because to me, he's one of the most fascinating. You talk about players with 5-position versatility. He's being talked about in that realm. And yet it seemed like for the most part, anytime I watched him, and I think even in the game on Saturday, they just kept him at tackle, even though he doesn't possess textbook ideal tackle specifications. But Marcus Bowe out of Purdue seems like a guy that some people think center's his best position. Barely 305, barely 6'4", really good hands, and seems really quick, has good feet. But were you surprised to see that they left him mostly at tackle during the week?
I was extremely surprised. I mean, I think, again, one of those guys where you look down on the field and you're like, why do they have that guy playing tackle? Because he's a head shorter than the guard. Like, he looked very undersized out there, and it could have just been perspective. It could have been who he was next to. But I just don't see him being able to succeed at tackle at the NFL level. I see him as an interior offensive lineman, and he's a guy I've been trying not to talk about too much because I hate ragging on guys, but I just didn't have a lot of positives to bring away from the Senior Bowl with him. I just thought he had a hard time. It looked like he struggled at multiple positions with multiple defensive linemen. It seemed like he never really settled into the week, and that could very well be the case. I know I talked with people a bunch, about how, these guys get down there. There's only so much you can take from day one because it's a lot of install. These guys are like still new to the environment. They're trying to figure out what's going on, what they're doing, and how day two is like really the best day of practice because the guys either settle in or they don't by day two. And if you're not going to settle in, day three is probably going to be a little rougher. But you get these guys on day two that are really out there and they're competing, they're comfortable, and they're playing their game. And it's like, oh yeah, that's the guy I saw on film. But then a guy like Bo, like it just felt like all week it was like waiting for him to like settle in and hey, like be the guy that I watched, be the guy that I watched in the summer, be the guy that I watched during the season, be the guy that I watched the week before I came down here. I never saw that. And that's where it's like, do you look at that as just like, it's an all-star game, don't wait it too much. Obviously by the end of the cycle, it was only a microcosm of the process. But right now, I mean, especially coming like immediately off of that week, it's like, I'm gonna have a hard time. I mean, there was guys talking about this guy being an early second round guy, and I have a hard time putting him on day two right now because of he just felt like he was outmatched on a consistent basis the whole week.
I want to ask you a couple of questions to finish up with that aren't necessarily offensive line based, although this first one might work into the answer. On your bio, you have a mantra, so to speak, or a mission statement. Build your team for your QB, not around your QB. There's a lot of discussion here in Seattle about what the future of the quarterback position is. Is it time to turn the page and try to find a young guy? And we, we're not going to talk about the timing of that or this class in this episode anyway, but it does sound like, especially there was a piece that came out today, Mike McDonald, really speaking highly about Geno Smith. For all the fans that would like us to move off of him, it's probably not going to happen. I think an extension is more likely to happen than them moving off of him. If you were John Schneider, taking your mantra into account, how would you build the Seahawks team for Geno Smith?
Well, I think there's a lot that goes into it, and it's in my bio for a reason. I could rant about it for a whole another hour, but I'm not going to do that today. However, I will say, so you have to look at your team in two pieces, right? There's the free agent acquisition and there's draft acquisition as far as personnel goes. And I've always been a big believer in you sign free agents for needs, you draft for wants. Whether those wants are also needs can be, that could be the same thing. You can have a need at a certain position, sign a guy, and then go draft a guy at that exact same position. That's totally okay. And I think there needs to be more people that are okay with that. Like going and signing, a mid to lower level, say, I'm a Bengals guy, so I always jump to interior offensive line because that's where I've been at this whole offseason. But going and signing like a middle tier guy there that you're like, I don't really want him to start, but he probably could. And then going and drafting a guy that you really like at that position as direct competition, and then go let it sort itself out. I mean, you're bringing in these really inflated rosters into camp. Don't be afraid of doing that. And so when I talk about building around your quarterback versus for your quarterback, like I prefer, there's such a haste in this league, right, for finding the franchise quarterback. Who's going to be the guy that takes us to the next step? And that's where I feel like don't give up on the good thing just because you're excited about the new thing, right? Especially in the case of Geno, right? Like I've been a Geno fan. I loved him as a fit in Seattle. I think he's done great things up there. Obviously, he's been a little up and down, but he's still hitting incentives. He's still, winning football games. So you can't really complain about that. There are much worse quarterbacks in the NFL than Geno Smith. And so I think you have a transition piece, is like I could call him, in Geno Smith already in place. Now, again, you might extend him, and that might be a whole thing that happens. I'm not going to get into the Seahawks talk too much right now, but if that is kind of the shorter term, long term plan of just like, hey, we're going to keep using Geno as long as we can until we find the guy that we like. Don't be in a rush to go get the Caleb Williams or even the Cam Ward, the Shadur Sanders. Don't be in a rush to go get the bright, shiny new toy. Wait till you get a quarterback that you actually like, you feel like you can work with, you feel like it's a good fit for your scheme, and then bring that guy in and let him, it's even better if you can give him time to transition. I mean, people don't talk about it all, but Mahomes had a redshirt year. I mean, he didn't come in and was a year one starter. He had time to develop. He had time to see the league. And so if you're able to give these rookie quarterbacks kind of that safer platform, I think they can project way higher than maybe even they look like throughout the draft process, because they actually can go into a stable environment. Now, to go into a stable environment, you have to create a stable environment. And that's where I always say build for them, not around them. You don't want to build around a guy in a tight window where it's like, oh, how long are we going to have him on his rookie deal? We got to win now. You don't want to do that. Rush decisions aren't good decisions. Go acquire good pieces, whether that's just taking the best player available on your board in the draft, regardless of need at that position. Again, we're drafted once, not needs. We're signing needs. Or is it just like, oh, hey, we have some receivers. We're not really anticipating retaining them long-term. They're coming up. They're a year or two away from a deal. Let's start taking shots at some receivers to try to replace that position. Let's go start taking shots at defensive back, linebacker, D-line, offensive line. That's where the draft gets so flexible for you, because you're not necessarily looking to fill needs. Like, oh, wow, we're running, this guy's contract's ending. We're going to have to replace him. Who are we going to replace him with? We can't replace him with that free agent. He's not going to be good enough. That's okay. Go sign a free agent that maybe isn't as good. Go let that guy walk, and then bring in competition, because competition is going to bump that guy up. And if it doesn't, now you got a rookie starting there, which is, maybe bad short-term, not what you want to hear. But for the long term, that could work out really nicely for you. Look at the Lions, look at the Packers. I mean, there's teams that have done this successfully. Just don't be afraid to acquire other pieces. Don't get sucked into, oh, well, that's a reach because you don't take that position, at this point in the draft. You got to sit on that. Oh, I had him later on my board. Like, if you like the guy, go get the guy. I've always been an advocate of that. That's why I love what the Lions have been doing. Go get players that you like their profile, you want in your room, you want on your team. And then over time, that's going to create a really good football team. And then you can end up like some of these teams where they don't even really need their offense to perform well, because their defense is outperforming their offenses. And boom, all of a sudden you get that franchise quarterback that you like. You bring him in, you inject some life into this offense, and now you're an unstoppable force, because you already had a defense that was winning your football games when you were scoring 7 to 10 points on offense, but your defense was able to also score 7 points and allow 0. I mean, that's what I've always said, and that's why I have that mantra, because there's so much value and stress placed on a quarterback, but if you bring him into a stable situation that he can actually grow and thrive in, you're going to get a better attitude from your quarterback, a better attitude from your fan base once you get that quarterback. I know it can be hard until then, and I get that. But then, that quarterback can start, once he settles in, he gets comfortable, his ceiling can raise. No one ever talks about ceilings raising once you get to the NFL, because that's where he's going to max out.
Yeah.
But you bring him into a stable situation and it can go well.
It's because you're talking about patience, and fans don't know what that means.
They don't have it. Neither do owners.
They don't know weaknesses. If they see highlights of a kid at any position and they see one bad thing and decide that player's not good, then it's hard to change their mind. Let me end on this though, because until there is clarity on Geno Smith's situation, and we might not get that until March 16th or thereabouts, because that's when his bonus money is due to him. Mm-hmm. Then it's going to continue to be a topic here in the Northwest about where the Seahawks might be able to find their next young franchise quarterback. One way to do that is to draft a guy. This is generally considered not the best class to maybe plan on that. Another opportunity, as you said, one of the levers is free agency. Outside of Sam Darnold, it's never really a great class. Usually good quarterbacks don't make it to free agency. And so another way that you could go about doing it is to find a guy who's blocked on a roster elsewhere, who has starter upside, and trade for him. The Seahawks did that with great success back in 2001 when Mike Holmgren took the job here, and he got Matt Hasselbeck, who was buried on the depth chart there in Green Bay. He was a third string quarterback, brought him with him. He became a 10-year starter, helped lead him to a Super Bowl. You cover the Cincinnati Bengals. That's who you create content for in a good chunk of your time. There's a young quarterback there that everyone here in the Northwest is very familiar with, in Jake Browning. And when he got an opportunity last year before last, when Burrow was hurt, he played extremely well and then signed a new 2-year deal, but for pennies, really, for a backup quarterback. Is there any scenario that you think, if the Seahawks or any other team, I suppose, were motivated to try to contact the Bengals and pry away Jake Browning because Joe Burrow's not going anywhere, could he be had?
I mean, that's the thing with the Bengals. The Bengals don't trade. The Bengals
Very
don't like
conservative.
The Bengals like their guys. Whether or not they should like their guys is quite a popular conversation among fans every single offseason and in season. But that's where, I mean, getting a guy like Jake Browning, who I think, when Burrow went down last season, or I guess 2 seasons ago now, he was able to step in and go win football games and still even have them competing for a playoff spot. Like, I just think, I mean, that's going to win a lot of favor in their eyes, which is going to bump his, value up in their eyes as well. Whether or not it should is a different conversation again. But I think Jake Browning is going to be an extremely hard piece to get out of Cincinnati, because not only do the Bengals always like coming out on top of trades, they like, they like quote unquote winning a trade. They like making sure they receive adequate value in their eyes. And again, when Jake Browning's valued at X in their eyes because of what he's done for them in their city, the Seahawks fans might, really like the prospect of that idea, bring the kid back. He might even like that idea. It could be, a great situation for the both of them. But the Bengals are just going to value that guy too high. I don't think it's going to be worthwhile to go try and acquire him. I don't think it'd be a bad idea. I'm a fan of what Browning's able to bring to the table, but I just don't know how feasible that is, just because of who you're dealing with from the team perspective.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense from their standpoint, because he's making, I think his cap hits less than $1 million. It's great.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. So Husky/Seahawk fans, if that's what you're pining for, you'll have to wait until he hits free agency next offseason. So. Hey, Parker, this was great. I really appreciate your time, man. This was awesome.
No, always a pleasure to come on. Thank you for the opportunity. It's always a blast. I'll talk ball all day, especially, they're asking about personal preferences and topics I enjoy. I'll talk all night. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it was great meeting you out down in Mobile.
Yeah, I'd say the same right back at you, and we'll definitely do this again. Maybe we'll bring you back at the latest after the draft, when certainly the Seahawks are probably going to pick up a couple new offensive linemen that I would love to get your opinion on. So
for sure, would love to be back.
All right, see you, man.
Have a good one.
I always love getting other opinions to things that I witness or experience myself, and sometimes it confirms my opinion on someone. And sometimes I learn something and it prompts me to go back and watch the tape. I'm going to go back and watch more Marcus Bowe tape, because what I'd watched before I went to Alabama, I really liked. But now I'm a little skeptical and I'm questioning my judgment. Whereas there are other times where there were guys that really stood out to me, some smaller school guys under the radar, guys I hadn't heard about or heard much buzz about while I was down there. And then you get back and all of a sudden they're showing up. Some of those guys are showing up on all these lists of risers and guys that made money. And so, sometimes I get it right, but that's scouting, right? Nobody gets it right 100% of the time. Keep that in mind, those of you that want to fire everybody in the front office because of 1 or 2 particular moves that they made or didn't make. We have so much more to cover over the next couple months as we head to the draft. And again, starting on, I'm going to be moving between the 16th and the 18th or so. Once I'm settled in, I will be doing this content full-time through the draft. And so you will get the best of what I can offer in terms of guests and more guys like Parker, experts in their field, and trying to break down this draft class and certainly looking into free agency and all the potential offseason moves the Seahawks might make to try and get over that hump, get from 9-10 wins to that next level, right? So until then, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, also on Blue Sky. Subscribe to the channel. And thank you again to BetUS for sponsoring this program. Big shout out to them. And thank you all of you for viewing and supporting the channel. And if you'd like to do that, just check the description. All the different ways are down below. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.